Where does all this leave the Prime Minister about domestically and in Canada-U.S. talks? Let's bring in our front bench. Former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton, is here. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Kathleen Monk is former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And rounding us out this evening, Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. That voice that we just heard asking those questions to the Premier was, of course, Laura's. So I will start with you, Laura. What do you think is really going on behind the scenes here?
Vashi, I honestly don't know. I wish I could read those text messages, because I think what's happening is there have been cracks in the cohesion between the messaging of the federal government and the provinces, and particularly with Premier Doug Ford for quite some time. And we've heard Premier Ford calling for Canada to push back, saying we need to retaliate, saying we shouldn't roll over. And that's been in contrast with what Prime Minister Carney has been doing recently, right? He's kind of been playing nice with President Trump. He's been talking about approaching a deal on certain sectors, such as steel and aluminum. And certainly the Prime Minister and his team were kind of setting up the possibility for that happening this week in Asia. I don't think that's going to happen anymore, although this is clearly a very unpredictable times. Don't quote me. But look, I mean, it looks like the provinces are starting to freelance a bit, quite frankly. And, Premier Ford clearly feels that there's a constituency within his province that wants him to push back. He expressed that he's concerned that autos are being left off the table. And he's also acknowledged that Prime Minister Carney is in a different position than him, and that he actually has to deal directly with Donald Trump. And so he's maybe not able to say and do some of the things that Ontario is doing. But the cracks are starting to show, I think, is what's happening. The impatience is growing. And, there's clearly frustration, I would say, amongst certain premiers that we have not been able to nail down a deal to protect some of these key sectors in BC as well. And I think that's starting to worry a lot of people at the provincial level.
It does feel like Laura's assessment, Kathleen, that like the cracks are starting to show is the case in this instance. And I know largely Ford and Carney have been aligned, but the fact that they're sort of digging into these differing positions, let's just say, just on the face of it, of the ad, and not trying to backtrack, says something, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if history will tell the story of whether the idea of having a premier act as the attack dog was the right move. That playbook has been rolled out in the past. Certainly, we used that playbook in 2018 and 2019 in the NAFTA renegotiations that ended in Kuzma with a specific labor leader. Unifor labor leader was outside being that attack dog. But that labor leader wasn't a premier of a province. And I think therein lies the rub. And, understanding what your role is in a moment in time. And, remember, Doug Ford just got reelected, a majority government just 8 months ago on fighting this fight, but fighting for jobs. And I think to hear him kind of crowing today about his earned media coverage or his media coverage on these ads doesn't sit well with a lot of the folks that are losing their jobs in Ingersoll, Kapuskasing, you name it, around the province of Ontario. And so you see Carney reacting to that, seeing how he can pull things back. He's saying, time to talk, like he said in the last few weeks. He's also saying, it's only us, it's only the feds that get to deal with trade and that negotiation, and we're going to wait Trump out. But there's still so many questions, not just the text, like Laura mentioned, between Carney and Ford. I want to know, who is the person that apologized to President Trump? Because President Trump today said that Canada has apologized for airing the ad. Who was that? Was that Minister LeBlanc? Yeah. Was it Ford?
I don't think it was Ford.
No, was it Christian, the Ambassador Hillman? Who was that? That's the question I want to know. I know certainly most people in question period today were curious about whether Carney had seen the ad and approved the ad in advance, but also who's doing kind of the backpedaling would be good to know too.
It does sort of all, if you take it in sum or in the aggregate, Shakir, lead us to this point where it feels like we're no further ahead than we were 6 months ago. Ultimately, when you do kind of contextualize it around people who are worried about their jobs, the state of the economy, the prospect of arriving at some place with the United States where we can take a sigh of relief, it doesn't feel like it's headed necessarily in that direction. I hope I'm wrong.
No, I would agree with you, and I think part of that is just a lack of transparency and communication. I think there's a lot of folks. I'm not sure how detailed the premiers are getting read into what's going on, but I think there's a lot of folks out there that really don't understand or know what the federal strategy is here. I heard you talking to former Premier Charest, and when Carney got elected, he was talking about negotiating a comprehensive trade and security agreement with the U.S. That's been downgraded to, we'll wait until Kuzma and renegotiate that. And even now, just talking about, something around certain sectors, and we'll see if we can reduce the tariffs there. But we don't understand why things have been downgraded. What are we not willing to trade off with the U.S.? Who's being more aggressive? I think Canadians understand that Donald Trump is a very frustrating person to negotiate with, and they're willing to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt. And he actually might be making all the right choices here. But without anybody knowing what's actually going on, you can't take comfort in a strategy that just relies on, hey, just trust me, I'm going to take care of this. I think that's his biggest problem. If he can give some color around what's actually happening there and what's going on moving forward, why things are breaking off and who won't give on what, I think he can get some relief here and release some of the pressure politically on him on this trade front. Because again, I think most Canadians can look at Donald Trump and view him as a very unreasonable negotiator, but we don't know what's going on in these trade negotiations right now.
Yeah, Dan, is there a way for the Prime Minister to address what Shakir lays out, while at the same time, maintain sensitivity around not wanting to put the entire, I understand the impetus to not want to put everything out in the public domain, but right now it feels like there's nothing.
Well, look, I think the politics in this environment are pretty clear. Voters are hungry for politicians to be angry, to throw up their elbows, to take a tougher stance with the negotiations with the United States. And I think when you're unfettered from the actual reality of those negotiations, like Mr. Poilievre or like Mr. Ford or like Premier Eby, it's easy to do that. It's easy to be the tough, angry guy throwing around a lot of big words and a lot of tough talk. But if you're in the actual negotiation, if you have a seat at that table, the Prime Minister is a lot more fettered by what he can do to try and respond to the political environment and what voters are expecting from him. And I think the reality is that the Prime Minister wasn't just elected to have his elbows up, as I think Mr. Poilievre said, and a lot of others have thrown around. He was elected because he is competent. He's the adult in the room. That a lot of Canadians put their confidence in him as the person who was up to this challenge and up to this moment. And I think he's responding to this particular moment right now in the right way. He's responding to it with maturity. He's responding to it with a sense of purpose, a sense of an eye on the ball. We've got to get the job done, and we're ready to do it. The President of the United States is throwing a temper tantrum over a television ad, and I think it would be unwise of Mr. Carney to try and respond accordingly, even if it would delight voters.